She stood outside a modest public elementary school in a provincial town in the Philippines, watching through a chain-link fence as her two children, 9 and 11 years old, stood slightly apart from a cluster of local students during their first recess period, and found herself fighting back tears of a specific kind she had not fully anticipated when she made the decision to relocate her family 8 months earlier. Tears rooted less in worry about that first difficult morning and more in the accumulated weight of a decision she had made almost entirely alone, without the community validation that a more conventional choice might have provided. This is her story and what happened over the following months, culminating in a specific afternoon that produced an entirely different kind of tears than the ones she had cried outside that fence. She had made the decision to relocate as a single parent following her divorce 2 years earlier, a decision driven by a combination of factors she wanted to walk through honestly, rather than presenting as a single, simple motivation. The financial calculation had been genuinely significant. Her income as a freelance graphic designer, supplemented by modest child support that arrived inconsistently, despite a formal court order, had left her managing an increasingly precarious budget in her original American city, one that had required, in the 2 years following her divorce, a series of difficult choices about which of her children's activities and opportunities she could genuinely afford to maintain. But the financial calculation, she was careful to note, had not been the only or even the primary factor. She had grown, over those same 2 years, increasingly concerned about a specific quality of anxiety and academic pressure she observed developing in both her children, particularly her older child, within an educational and social environment she experienced as genuinely more competitive and achievement-focused than what she remembered from her own childhood decades earlier, a pattern she had discussed extensively with both children's teachers and a family therapist, before ultimately concluding that a more fundamental change of environment, rather than incremental adjustments within the existing system, represented her best available response. The decision to specifically enroll her children in a local public Filipino school, rather than one of the international schools that cater specifically to expatriate families and generally charge tuition comparable to private American schools, emerged from both a practical financial calculation and a more deliberate philosophical choice she wanted to explain with genuine care. International school tuition, she had discovered during her research, would have consumed a meaningful portion of her available budget, undermining much of the financial relief her relocation was specifically intended to provide. But beyond the financial consideration, she had made a deliberate decision that she wanted her children to experience genuine immersion in their new community and its language, rather than existing within an insulated expatriate bubble that, while offering an English language curriculum more directly comparable to what they had left behind, would have limited the depth of cultural and linguistic integration she specifically hoped the relocation might offer them. Before we get into what those first difficult months actually involved, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week on this channel, we share real, honest stories of Americans starting over overseas, not the polished version, the honest one. Subscribe now so you never miss one. The first month, she wanted to be direct, had been genuinely difficult in ways that had tested her confidence in the decision more severely than she had anticipated during her planning process. Neither child spoke functional Tagalog or the specific regional dialect used in casual conversation among their new classmates, leaving both of them, particularly during unstructured time like recess and lunch, in a position of genuine linguistic isolation that the school's teachers, while generally warm and accommodating, had limited capacity to fully address, given the practical realities of managing a classroom of over 30 students, with only occasional individual attention available for any single child's specific adjustment needs. Her younger child had cried most mornings during that first month, a response she found genuinely difficult to witness, while maintaining her own confidence that the decision remained sound, and her older child, while outwardly more stoic, had displayed a specific withdrawal and reluctance to discuss school at all during their regular after-school conversations, a silence she found, in some ways, more concerning than her younger child's more visible distress. The specific turning point she wanted to describe with genuine detail, because she felt the general phrase, "things got better," did not adequately capture the actual mechanism of change. Began roughly during the 6th week, when her younger child returned home with a specific and unexpected development. A classmate named in the story only as a girl a year older, who had begun, apparently on her own initiative rather than any teacher's direct instruction, sitting with her younger child during lunch and patiently working through basic vocabulary exchange, teaching Tagalog words in exchange for English ones. A specific and voluntary act of inclusion that her child described, with the particular clarity children sometimes bring to significant experiences, as the first time since arriving that school had felt like somewhere she actually wanted to be, rather than somewhere she was required to endure. That specific relationship, she said, had functioned as something of a bridge for both of her children over the following months, since her older child, initially more resistant to the entire adjustment process, had gradually been drawn into the same friendship group through his sister's connection, finding, through that indirect pathway, his own eventual social footing within the broader class, in a way he might not have found as readily through his own initial, more withdrawn approach to the adjustment. By roughly the 4th month, she noted a specific and observable shift in both children's daily demeanor. Her younger child arriving home with functional conversational Tagalog vocabulary she had not explicitly taught her, and could not have anticipated her younger child accumulating so rapidly through peer immersion alone, and her older child beginning to voluntarily share specific details about his school day, a level of engagement that represented to her a genuinely significant shift from his earlier withdrawal. The specific afternoon that produced the different kind of tears referenced in her story's framing arrived during the school's annual cultural festival, roughly 7 months into their enrollment, an event she had approached with some genuine apprehension given her children's still developing but incomplete integration into the broader school community. She wanted to describe the specific moment with genuine detail because she felt it captured something the more general narrative of gradual adjustment could not fully convey on its own. Her children had been assigned, alongside their classmates, to perform a traditional folk dance as part of the festival's program, a performance requiring weeks of after-school practice she had watched them attend with what she now recognized, in retrospect, as genuine enthusiasm, rather than the reluctant obligation that had characterized their earlier months. Watching both of her children, dressed in traditional attire provided and helped into by the same classmates who had originally welcomed them, perform alongside their peers with what appeared to be genuine confidence and evident enjoyment, she found herself crying in the audience, tears that carried none of the isolation and uncertainty of that first difficult morning outside the fence, but rather a specific and overwhelming recognition that her children had, in the span of 7 months, built something genuinely their own within a community that had, by every visible measure, fully welcomed them as its own. She wanted to address directly a specific concern she has received repeatedly from other American parents considering a similar decision, regarding academic continuity and whether her children's educational trajectory had been genuinely served by this transition, rather than potentially compromised by removing them from a more internationally recognized curriculum. She was honest that this remained a genuine and ongoing consideration she continued actively managing, rather than one she considered fully resolved, supplementing the local school curriculum with additional English language reading and mathematics materials at home, specifically to ensure her children maintained skills that would allow for a genuinely smooth eventual transition, should they ever return to an American educational system or pursue international higher education. A supplementary effort she considered a genuine and ongoing responsibility rather than a burden, but one she wanted acknowledged honestly rather than glossed over in favor of a simpler narrative focused entirely on the social and emotional benefits she had also genuinely observed. When asked what she would tell another parent considering a similar decision, relocating children into full immersion in a local rather than international school system, Her answer focused specifically on the importance of sustained parental engagement throughout what she considered an inevitably difficult initial adjustment period, rather than any suggestion that the difficulty itself indicated the decision had been wrong. She recommended maintaining close and consistent communication with teachers, despite genuine language barriers on both sides, often relying on translation applications during her own early conversations with her children's teachers. Actively supplementing academic areas she worried might not receive sufficient individual attention within larger local classroom sizes, and, most significantly in her own experience, resisting the specific temptation to intervene too quickly or too directly in her children's social integration process. Trusting, as difficult as that trust had genuinely been during those first crying mornings, that authentic connection, when it eventually arrived, as it had through her younger child's unexpected lunch companion, would prove considerably more durable and meaningful than any connection she might have engineered more directly on her children's behalf. If you are watching this and are considering a similar decision for your own children, full immersion in a local school system rather than an international or homeschool alternative, she wanted to leave you with the specific reassurance her own 7 months had eventually produced, offered alongside genuine acknowledgement of how difficult the earlier months genuinely were. The specific crying mornings and social isolation of an initial adjustment period are not evidence that the decision was wrong, but rather, in her own family's experience, a genuinely necessary passage toward a depth of belonging and cultural integration that a more insulated, immediately comfortable alternative likely would not have ultimately provided. Subscribe to Second Life Abroad and turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone you know who is considering a similar decision for their own children and needs to hear that the difficult early mornings do not predict the eventual outcome. We will see you in the next one. There is a specific financial dimension of this decision she wanted addressed directly, because she felt it illustrated something important beyond the emotional and social narrative that had otherwise dominated her account. Her total educational costs for both children, including school fees that remained genuinely minimal within the Philippine public system, required uniforms and the supplementary materials she purchased to maintain their English language academic skills, ran to approximately $45 monthly combined for both children, a figure she found genuinely difficult to reconcile against what she had been paying for a single child's participation in extracurricular enrichment programs alone during their final year in the United States, programs she had felt genuine pressure to maintain despite their cost, specifically because withdrawing her children from them would have represented, within her original American community, a visible and uncomfortable signal of financial struggle she had wanted to avoid projecting to other parents and to her children themselves. She wanted to note this specific contrast, not to suggest that cost alone should drive an educational decision this significant, but because she felt the financial relief itself had produced a secondary and unexpected benefit, freeing meaningful monthly income that she had redirected toward a modest emergency savings fund she had been unable to maintain during her final 2 years in the United States, a specific form of financial security that had, in its own way, reduced a background level of anxiety in her own daily life that she suspected her children had likely absorbed and reflected during those final difficult years before their relocation, even without any explicit conversation about household finances occurring directly in front of them. She also wanted to address, directly, a specific question she has received from other single parents considering a similar relocation, regarding whether managing this transition alone, without a partner to share both the practical logistics and the emotional weight of watching her children struggle during those first difficult weeks, had been genuinely more difficult than the general narrative of family relocation abroad typically acknowledges. She was honest that it genuinely had been.